Welcome back, everyone, to AAS Deep Dive number 21. We're going to be taking a deep dive into how airlines are shifting and changing, especially based on some recent developments across the globe.
Yeah, it should be really interesting.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
So we're focusing on three airlines of different sizes, and I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this.
For sure.
Is that, you've got Sri Lankan Airlines
Okay.
with 22 aircraft,
Mm-hmm.
and then Air Baltic with 50, and then Asiana, a much larger carrier, with 108 aircraft.
Right. Yeah. Very different.
So very, very different.
Yeah. And I think it'll be fascinating to see how they're all tackling the challenges because the global airline industry, right, it's in a constant state of flux. So what does it take for airlines to actually thrive, you know?
Absolutely. And not just survive,
Yeah.
but actually thrive.
Exactly.
So let's start with Sri Lankan Airlines.
Okay.
They've been making headlines recently with the Sri Lankan government stepping in to provide some financial support.
Right. Yeah. A pretty big amount, too. 67.5 million USD.
Yeah.
Which, it's interesting because it's not like they're bailing out a failing airline.
No.
Sri Lankan's actually been operationally profitable for the past 3 years. So this is more about, addressing those loan repayments.
Yeah.
The interest on what their CEO, Richard Nordahl, calls legacy debt.
Yeah, and it sounds like that debt has been a real burden on their financials.
Absolutely.
Nuttall mentioned that financing costs alone eat up 17% of their revenue.
Yeah, that's a huge chunk of their earnings.
It is a huge chunk.
Really puts it into perspective, right? How past decisions and those financial burdens can really weigh an airline down.
Yeah.
From being competitive.
Absolutely.
And growing and expanding.
So it sounds like this is almost a temporary solution with a longer-term vision in mind.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about giving them that breathing room to really become fully responsible for their own profitability.
And what's really striking is that, despite these challenges, Nuttall is really optimistic about the future. He's talking about doubling their fleet size in the next 5 years.
Very ambitious.
What's driving that confidence?
Well, their strategy seems to be focused on really maximizing their existing network.
Okay.
So instead of, venturing into new territories, adding destinations, they're planning on increasing the frequency of flights on their current routes.
So they're saying, all right, we have all these routes, let's just do them even more often.
Exactly. Consolidating their presence in those markets where they're already established.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So that's like saying, let's perfect what we're good at before we spread ourselves too thin.
Yeah.
But how sustainable is that long term? Like, won't they eventually need to expand, to tap into new markets?
Well, that's a good question. And it brings us to another interesting point about their plan, fleet renewal.
Okay.
Their current fleet of A330s, they're aging. And Nuttall's hinting at replacing them, potentially with either newer Airbus models, so the A330-900N, the A350, or even switching over to Boeing with the 787.
That's a huge decision.
Huge decision. And each aircraft type has its own, strengths and weaknesses, so their choice is going to have a major impact on their costs, on the passenger experience, and ultimately their long-term competitiveness.
Could you break down some of the key differences between the options?
Sure. So if they stick with Airbus, the A330-900N, it's going to give them more fuel efficiency, greater range compared to their existing A330s.
So good for those frequent long-haul flights that they're aiming for.
Exactly. Now, the A350, that's even more fuel efficient, technologically advanced, but a much higher price tag.
Okay.
So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, cost versus capability. What about the Boeing 787? How does that stack up?
Well, the 787 is known for its fuel efficiency and passenger comfort.
Okay.
Like, bigger windows, higher humidity levels.
Which would be good for the passengers on those longer flights.
Exactly. But introducing a whole new aircraft type from a different manufacturer, that would be a significant investment in training, maintenance infrastructure, the whole thing.
Yeah, so no easy answers.
No easy answers.
They're going to have to weigh the pros and cons, see what aligns with their overall strategy.
Absolutely. And this decision also kind of brings up another point, which Nuttall mentioned. Securing new aircraft is becoming more and more challenging because the competition in the aircraft leasing market is so intense.
Oh, wow.
So even if they decide on a particular model,
yeah,
actually acquiring it might be another hurdle.
Wow. All right, so Sri Lankan Airlines, they have a lot on their plate.
They do.
Managing debt.
Yep.
Expanding their fleet, making these decisions about aircraft types, navigating this competitive leasing market, all while aiming for this really ambitious growth plan. So let's switch gears now. Let's fly over to South Korea.
Okay.
Where Asiana Airlines is facing a different set of circumstances.
Very different, yes. Yeah, so Asiana, they're in the final stages of a merger with Korean Air.
Right.
And, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
that comes with a whole set of financial complexities.
Yeah, for sure.
Two South Korean state-owned banks, so Korea Development Bank and Export-Import Bank of Korea, they've just called in the remaining loan debt from Asiana,
Okay.
which is a pretty hefty sum. It's KRW 1.38 trillion,
Wow.
about 957 million USD.
That's a huge demand.
It is.
Is this a sign that the merger isn't going as well as planned?
Well, actually, it seems to be quite the opposite.
Oh,
This move by the banks is actually being seen as a sign of confidence
okay.
in the merged entity's financial stability.
Okay.
Like, they wouldn't be calling in this debt if they weren't pretty sure that this newly formed airline
Right.
could handle it.
So it's almost like saying, all right, you two are a power couple now.
Yeah.
You need to prove you can handle the combined financing.
Yes, exactly. And to Asiana's credit, they've been steadily paying down their debt over the last 3 years.
Okay.
Showing that their performance is improving.
Yeah.
So this merger, it kind of just accelerates that journey towards a stronger financial footing.
It's a remarkable turnaround
It is.
when you think about it, because just a few years ago, Asiana was really close to collapsing after that failed takeover bid.
Yeah.
So this merger with Korean Air seems to be exactly what they needed.
Yeah, a lifeline, for sure.
But what about the actual, the operational side?
Right.
Merging two major airlines, that can't be easy.
Oh, absolutely. Not integrating those operations is a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
And while we don't have all the specifics just yet, we can definitely anticipate some key areas that they'll be focusing on.
Okay.
So, for example, route networks, they'll probably be streamlined to avoid any overlap and really maximize efficiency.
Makes sense.
We might even see consolidation of their aircraft fleets and maintenance facilities.
What about the branding? Like, will Asiana's brand just disappear, or will they try and keep some of its identity?
That's a great question, and it really often depends on, the level of brand loyalty recognition associated with each airline. Sometimes a merged airline might go for a hybrid brand,
Okay.
incorporating elements from both.
Okay.
And in other cases, a complete rebrand might be the way to go
Right.
to really signal that fresh start.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what direction they choose.
It will.
But beyond those logistical challenges, are there any benefits to this merger? What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, by combining their resources and operations, they're going to be able to save a lot of money.
Okay.
And they can leverage that combined market share, to negotiate better deals with suppliers. And they could even unlock some new revenue streams by expanding their network reach.
So it's not just about surviving.
Right.
It's about thriving and creating this more competitive airline.
Exactly. Becoming financially stronger
Yeah.
so that they can really thrive in the long run.
For the long haul.
Speaking of financial restructuring and ambitious plans, let's look at Air Baltic.
Okay.
They're Latvian airline, and they're getting ready for a big step.
Okay.
An initial public offering and IPO.
Oh, wow. So this is where things get interesting.
Yeah, they're aiming to raise a substantial amount of money, 300 million euros.
Wow.
Or 314 million USD from this IPO.
That's a bold move.
It is, and they're clearly doing everything they can to make it work.
Yeah.
So in preparation for this IPO, they've completed a capital reduction.
Okay.
Which basically simplifies their share structure,
Mm-hmm.
making it more attractive to investors.
Makes sense.
But what's even more striking is the commitment shown by their board members who have taken a 40% pay cut.
40%.
40%.
Wow, that's a big pay cut.
It is a drastic measure for sure.
It definitely signals commitment,
Yeah,
but some people might see it as kind of a sign of desperation.
sure.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's a bold statement, that's for sure, and probably a calculated risk.
Okay.
I mean, on one hand, it shows potential investors that the leadership is willing to make sacrifices,
Right?
as alongside everyone else, to make sure the company is financially healthy.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it could raise concerns
Yeah.
about the company's underlying financial stability.
Right.
And potentially even affect employee morale.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act for sure.
It is.
Only time will tell if it pays off.
Exactly, but it seems to have caught the attention of at least one big player, Lufthansa Group.
Okay.
They've acquired a 10% stake in Air Baltic,
Wow.
which is a big vote of confidence.
It is. Lufthansa is a very well-respected airline
Absolutely.
with a really strong track record.
Yeah,
So them investing in Air Baltic, that's a pretty big endorsement
it really is.
of their potential.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the money.
Right.
It's also about that expertise
Exact.
and those potential network synergies.
It opens a lot of doors for them.
So we've got Air Baltic simplifying their share structure,
Yes.
demonstrating their commitment through these salary cuts,
Mm-hmm.
and they're securing this investment from a major player in the industry,
Yep.
all to get ready for this IPO that will hopefully fuel their future growth.
Exactly. They're aiming high,
Yeah.
and they're taking big steps to get there. But the success of their IPO, it's really going to depend on how well they can communicate their vision to investors
Right.
and show them that they can execute this growth strategy.
Yeah. It's a high-stakes game.
It is.
The outcome's still uncertain,
Absolutely.
but it's clear that they're not afraid to take risks
No, they're not.
and make bold moves
Bold moves.
to chart their own course.
Now, let's take a step back
Okay.
and consider what we've learned from these three very different airlines.
Okay.
We've got Sri Lankan Airlines dealing with a legacy debt, but still going for that ambitious growth strategy,
Right.
focusing on their existing network.
Yeah.
We have Aviation Airlines going through this complex merger, trying to leverage those synergies to become stronger and more competitive.
Yeah.
And we have Air Baltic's taking this leap of faith with the IPO,
Right.
showing their commitment and attracting these strategic partnerships
Yeah.
to fuel their ambition.
What I find fascinating is each of these airlines is tackling a different piece of the financial puzzle that all airlines face.
It's true.
Sri Lankan's dealing with their debt.
Yep.
Asiana's using a merger to get stronger financially.
Hmm.
And Air Baltic is looking for fresh capital through an IPO.
That's right.
To grow.
Highlights how many different strategies airlines can use
Yeah.
to navigate these financial complexities in this industry.
Mhm.
There's no one right answer.
Right.
And each airline has to carefully assess their strengths, their weaknesses, where they stand in the market
Yeah.
to figure out the best way forward.
And it's not just about the finances. It's about making the right operational and strategic decisions, too.
Exactly. Let's dive into some of those key decisions
Yeah.
that each airline is facing,
Okay.
starting with Sri Lankan Airlines
Okay.
and their big choice about fleet renewal.
Right. Whether they're going to stick with Airbus or switch to Boeing,
Mm-hmm.
that decision's going to have a ripple effect for years.
It will.
It's not just about picking the newest plane.
Nope.
They have to think about things like fuel efficiency,
Yeah,
maintenance costs, how comfortable the passengers are,
right.
even the environmental impact.
Absolutely. All important factors.
And we can't forget about the operational side of things either.
No.
Bringing in a new aircraft type from a different manufacturer,
Right.
that would require a lot of investment in training,
Mm-hmm.
new maintenance infrastructure, spare
A
parts.
huge undertaking.
Yeah, so for our listeners,
Yeah.
think about the last time you flew.
Mm-hmm.
What stood out to you about the aircraft?
Yeah.
Was it spacious?
Right.
Was the entertainment system good?
Mm-hmm.
These are all things that airlines think about
Absolutely.
when they make these fleet decisions.
Trying to strike that balance between their operational needs and what the passenger wants.
Right, keeping everyone happy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in a world where, everyone's posting reviews online, social media can really make or break an airline.
Oh, sure.
So that passenger experience,
Yeah,
it's more important than ever.
there is.
And speaking of reputation, I think Air Baltic's IPO preparations are a really good example of how they're trying to manage how the public sees them.
Absolutely. They're being very deliberate about projecting that image of transparency,
Yeah.
of financial responsibility, which is crucial when you're trying to get investors on board.
Yeah, they need to show that they're trustworthy.
Exactly. And those steps they've taken, like that capital reduction, the board members taking those pay cuts,
Right.
it all adds to this story that they're serious about the future.
They're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and it seems to be working.
Yeah.
Getting Lufthansa Group as an investor, that's a huge win for them.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's not just the money, it's the validation of their strategy.
Right. It's a signal to other potential investors.
Exactly, saying, hey, Air Baltic is a good bet.
Yeah, they're worth a look.
And what I find really interesting is how Air Baltic is using this IPO not just to raise capital,
Right.
but to really reshape their brand image.
Okay.
They're presenting themselves as this forward-thinking,
Mm-hmm.
growth-oriented airline,
Yeah.
which is a powerful message.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just about attracting investors, it's about attracting passengers, too.
Right, and potential partners.
Exactly.
So let's zoom out for a second, look at the bigger picture there.
Okay.
We've got Sri Lankan Airlines dealing with their debt, but still going for growth.
Yeah.
Asiana Airlines going through this merger.
Mm-hmm.
And Air Baltic taking this leap with their IPO.
Big moves.
What does this tell us about the state of the airline industry today?
I think it really shows the resilience of this industry.
Okay.
And how adaptable it is.
Yeah.
We're seeing these airlines take very different approaches
Yeah.
to solve the challenges they face and make the most of opportunities that come up.
Right.
Whether that's tackling debt, going for a merger, or doing an IPO.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
There's no magic formula.
No, but it's a constant process of evolution.
Yeah.
Innovation.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, what really stands out to me is how these stories show how connected the airline industry is
Mm-hmm.
to the world of finance,
Yeah.
strategic
Yeah,
partnerships,
sure.
even public perception.
Absolutely all intertwined.
Yeah, the decisions these airlines make have a ripple effect,
Yeah, they do.
not just on their own operations,
Right.
but on the whole industry.
Exactly. And as we've seen, those decisions are often driven by a mix of things:
Of course.
financial considerations, the reality of their operations,
Mm-hmm.
and their overall strategic vision.
It's like a big puzzle with all these pieces.
Yes.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways our listeners can think about?
Well, first, I think it's clear that the airline industry is dynamic and constantly changing.
Right, always on the move.
And the airlines that can adapt to those changes, embrace innovation, and make those smart strategic decisions, those are the ones that are going to thrive in the future.
Yeah,
Second, I think these stories remind us that there's no single path to success.
no,
Each airline has to look at its own situation, its own goals, its own strengths,
right.
and chart a course that makes sense for them.
Makes sense to me.
And finally, I think for those of us who are really into this industry,
Yeah,
these stories really highlight the importance of understanding not just the money side of things,
right.
but also how airlines operate, the strategic partnerships they form, and how their relationship with the public is always evolving.
It's a fascinating world to follow,
It is.
full of challenges and opportunities.
Lots to keep us on our toes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this CAS deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into the world of airlines navigating change. Until next time.
Happy flying, everyone!
Happy flying.